Hey, folks, this is the legislative recap for this week in Washington, D.C. So, we're going to start with H.R. 8595, which is the National Security Department of State and Related Programs Appropriations Act. This is where we decide how much money we're spending of your tax money on the State Department and those related programs. The bill is for $47.32 billion. So, that's for kind of all the overseas, the embassies, and all those kind of things. The SAVE Act was also put into this bill. So if you don't know what the Save America Act, it requires anybody voting in American elections to provide photo identification. And when you register to vote, you must prove citizenship when you register to vote. So that was added to the bill. Now, unfortunately, I was traveling to my district, back to our district for the Defense Summit at Carlisle, so I missed this vote. So I filled out a form that explains what my vote would have been had I been here. As you know, I rarely, if ever, miss votes, but the president was in the district. It was in Carlisle with Senator McCormick about defense, which is big in Pennsylvania and big in our district. So I felt the need to be there. But I would have voted yes on this bill had I been present. All right, the next, H.R. 1181, the Protecting Privacy and Purchases Act. I voted yes on this. This bill would prevent private credit card networks from assigning what's called a merchant category code to retailers to track different things that they like or don't like. So in this instance, they can't provide this code or assign this code to retailers if they're selling firearms or ammunition. I don't think it's appropriate for retailers to be signing these codes to things that they like or dislike, whether it's a flag of a country that they don't like or whether they're, whatever it is they don't like. We don't need these merchant codes put on things like that to track those purchases. So I voted yes on that. H.R. 139, the Sunshine Protection Act. It eliminates essentially the federal requirement for states to change the clocks and makes daylight savings time year-round permanent. Now, I will say I didn't love the bill as it was. I'd rather see something more of a states' rights issue and a bill that related to that. For instance, if you're in the western part of the country, something pretty much west of Texas, your kids are going to be going to the school in the dark in the wintertime up until maybe like 8:30 in the morning or something like that. So I thought it was imperfect, but I also know that the vast majority of my bosses, my constituents, wanted that bill to pass. So I voted in favor of it. I guess, like I said, it's not a perfect bill. Not almost none of them are, but I did vote yes for that. So we'll see what happens to that in the Senate now. And then H.R. 8897, the Improving Travel for American Families Act. I voted yes on this. It directs the TSA to establish a 2-year pilot program to provide for alternate security for families traveling with children under 12 years old. So what the bill provides for is probably or generally a separate lane for families, and especially if you have TSA pre-check, which you have to pay for, but your child doesn't. If your child is under 12 years old and you have TSA pre-check, your child can go with you in the TSA pre-check line. So we're trying to just kind of streamline that process and make it easier for families, and especially those with children under 12, to get through that line. So there were a couple other bills that we expected to vote on but didn't make it, and 2 days of the week for me were spent traveling back and forth from Washington, D.C. to the Defense Summit in Carlisle. And I hope you got to see some of that. As you know, there's probably about 200,000 defense-related jobs in Pennsylvania. It's billions of dollars, probably 10,000 or so companies doing defense-related work, anywhere from shipbuilding to ammunition production in the Scranton area to portions of the nuclear triad right in our district, and of course the various military installations, whether they're in the district like Mechanicsburg or New Cumberland, or just outside the district like Letterkenny or Fort Indian Town Gap. defense is a big deal for Pennsylvania and for our region. So I spent time there with Senator McCormick, the president, and all the institutions and businesses related to the defense of our country. And then finally, I introduced some legislation this week, H.R. 9713, the No More Debt Relief to China Act. Essentially, what the bill would do would be to remove the United States from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group if any of those organizations provide debt relief to the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China is no longer, and has not been for a long time, a backwater nation that is economically unviable. They are our biggest economic competitor, and we don't need to be paying those institutions to be bailing out the debts of the Communist Party of China and help them in their strategic competition against the United States of America. So I introduced that. And then the next one I introduced, H.R. 9687, the Blocking the CCP Spy Tech Act of 2026. It gives the government, the federal government, a year to evaluate some of the hardware that comes from China that is used in the United States to determine whether it's a national security risk. And then within that year, if they determine it is a national security risk, then they would be required to place it on the covered list. It's called the covered list, which prohibits the use and restricts heavily the use of that equipment in the United States of America. What kind of equipment might you say? Generally speaking, it's a lot of telecom equipment. It's generally technical equipment, but it could be anything from telecom equipment to, say, rail cars, which are oftentimes were produced in China, but they put technology in that equipment that is used to spy on America, and that's why they make it there and send it there. It is the House companion bill to the Senate bill, which has been offered by Senator Rick Scott from Florida. So that is the companion in the House to that bill in the Senate. And of course, we're trying to safeguard our country from Chinese products that are sent here for the express purpose of spying on America and Americans, but under the guise of some other product. So we want them to be put on that list, and we want to make sure there's a timeline for the federal government to evaluate those products. So that's the recap for this week. I hope you are having a great summer, and we'll be back next week, so we'll talk to you then. So God bless you. Have a great and safe weekend.